Hello, and thank you for selecting my video. I've published my video online for you and anyone else who would like to see my article about Dundee's Whitfield Housing Scheme. I would like to share with you my article about it. My article includes photos and old photos and video footage, all of which I have taken about Whitfield, and photos over various years showing Whitfield's scarring in its original unfaced condition. The music used in my video was made by me. The Whitfield Housing Scheme lies on the far northeast corner of Dundee City and was built on a farm called Whitfield during the mid to late 1960s. Whitfield Housing Scheme was once the biggest housing scheme in Europe and was made of 3 parts. These parts were Lower Whitfield, which was at the front, Summerfield Avenue, and the back upper part of Whitfield. The back upper part of Whitfield was the biggest part and was made up of the iconic Whitfield scarring blocks. The lower part and Summerfield Avenue were made up with a mixture of a different type of scarring block and a more familiar conventional looking blocks of flats for Dundee. There were also terrace housing in the Lower Whitfield and Summerfield Avenue. Whitfield Housing Scheme also had 2 large multi-storey tower blocks called Whitfield Court and Quarryfield Courts. For one of them, the other one was called Greenfield and Kellyfield Courts. Each tower block were made up of 2 courts. Both multis were demolished using explosives by demolitions teams. Whitfield and Quarryfield Courts in 2003 was demolished, and Greenfield and Kellyfield Court was demolished in 2004. The Whitfield Housing Scheme had a high school called Whitfield High, and it changed its name and was renamed to Braveview Academy during the late 1990s. Whitfield also had primary schools. Longhall Primary and a nearby St Saviour's was opposite Drumgeith Park, at the foot of the Lower Whitfield, both of which are demolished now. Those are just 2 to name a few that are in Whitfield area. The iconic scarring blocks built at the back of Whitfield were large rectangular blocks with at least one upper full-length corridor. A lot of them had both upper and lower corridors. The scarring blocks had flat roofs and they had external staircases to form access and an interchange for the other neighbouring blocks' upper corridors. It also housed the bin chute. The Whitfield scarring at the back of Whitfield had the blocks arranged in a hexagonal formation. Inside the houses, the staircases were arranged in various positions. Some had stairs going down to the living rooms, some went up. Some houses even had 2 staircases, one which was immediately after the front door to the rest of the house. The scarring blocks were a Swedish design and were built in a prefabrication form for a quicker build. After Whitfield was completed, around the early 1970s, it was decided during the 1980s that Whitfield needed improvements. Some of the scarring blocks were refaced and pointed apex roofs were put on them, and some blocks were demolished, and that made room for more private houses to be built in their place. Today, Whitfield is still gradually being regenerated with only a few of the refaced but original scarring blocks remaining. Lower Whitfield, at the front of Whitfield, have a lot of conventional looking houses, with a lot having roofs with the apex put on them later, at a later stage in their life. At the foot of Lower Whitfield sits Drumgeith Park. Drumgeith Park sits between Lower Whitfield and the neighbouring housing scheme called Midcraigie Housing Scheme. Whitfield Housing Scheme was served by the 15 and 17 bus services which ran from Ninewells Hospital to the west of Dundee and the city centre. Recently the 15 service was stopped and replaced with more 17s instead. The main bus services were served by the main bus operator, which was former Tayside buses. After Whitfield Multis were demolished back in 2003, the ground where they once stood has now got the new North East Campus School built on it. Whitfield Housing Scheme had a Labour social club, which was converted into shops after Whitfield's main shopping precinct was demolished back in 2016. Recently there was a pub added to the former Labour club, and that was called the Tavern. The former Labour club has a variety of shops, which include a couple of hot food takeaways. The grounds where the old Whitfield shopping precinct once stood has nothing built on it at the moment. Hello, and standing at Whitfield at the bottom of Long Hall Road where it meets Berwick Drive. This is the big sweeping bend, and I used to stay in Cheviot Crescent, and that's just on the edge of the city, Dundee city. It's right next door to Whitfield, and I stayed there since I was born from 1975 to 1980. And I remember the Whitfield scarring blocks. They were all along here on this side, but they've all, until a few years back, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, all these new houses have been built in their place. But the Cheviot Crescent is that street, right on the edge of the Finchley, which is on the northeast corner of Dundee city. Although that block, there was originally a row of blocks on both sides. I was on the other side, further up, number 24, and I used to come into Whitfield. A new family, well, my family knew people there. So the Whitfield Housing Scheme was the largest, at one time it was the largest scheme in Europe. And it was the back. The Whitfield was made up of 3 parts. You had the lower Whitfield, Summerfield Avenue, and the back of Whitfield, which stretches all the way down to Blumby. This is Berwick Drive, it goes down that way. And that was the iconic part of Whitfield. It had the majority of the blocks were scarring blocks. Now today there's only a few of these blocks, a few of them surviving, but they've been refaced. They were refaced during, well, the refacing programme started in the mid-80s, I think, around about there. So gradually some of the ones were refaced, but a lot of them were demolished. So I'm going to go around to Harrington Crescent, Dunbar Crescent, whereas the majority of the surviving Whitfield scarring blocks are surviving today. So I'll go around and I'll show you those. So in the crescent, it's a typical Whitfield crescent, and the original blocks were in this hexagonal formation. This was how they were done. So I've got an aerial photograph when I had a flying lesson in 1999, and I took that picture over Whitfield, and you could see the hexagonal formations of the crescent. This one still survives. You've got the scarring blocks, original scarring blocks that have been refaced. And you've got some longer versions as well. I mean, this block here is one of the 12 bay ones, but the standard scarring blocks were usually 6 bays wide, and they were usually all the one level of roof. You did get some that had the step on them as well. I'll turn the camera around and I'll show you some of the dwellings, the staircase as well, and the corridors. So this is typically what the landrings and corridors were like. As you can see, they're very long, and all the houses are on one side, and on the other side you've got these rectangular like apertures. Now originally there was a lower rectangular aperture with it as well, and that was covered with perspex, and also the staircases. The railings, all these blocks were interconnected with these external staircases, so you were able to walk right across Whitfield just with these junctions with the staircases. But they had problems with that, and they ended up putting bars to stop motorbikes from scooting around. Well, the corridors in Whitfield were very narrow. They weren't very wide, and they were also quite shallow. Now, in about average height, in 6 foot tall, and that's the roof. So there's not really much height, and that makes the corridors look very long. Some of these blocks, by the way, had corridors on the lower level. Some had houses on the lower level where you were able to access from outside. It didn't have corridors. They just had the corridor along the top. This particular block's got the two corridors. It's got the upper corridor we're in on nil, and it's got the lower corridor. Now, since they were refaced they started dividing the lower corridors up into segments, and they were a lot shorter. They were just split into the sections where the house were. So added garden areas as well. The roofs as well, you might make out the roof on that one there. They started putting roofs, apex roofs on them when they refaced the scarring blocks during the refacing programme. Now this is an example of one of the scarring blocks. It's only got the single row, the upper corridor, and access to the house was on the ground level, and that was the front doors there. Now that's just an example of the 12 bay scarring blocks, one of the extra long ones, and the lower level on these design of, well, since they were refaced, they were divided up into, so it's not one big long corridor, they've been divided into 3, and that was done during refacing, I believe. And this is the external staircase. So this is the example of one of the big long ones with the twin, or the split level, so it kind of goes down as a step. That will just be accommodate for the land, to keep the building level. Now in the distance there, that's the former Whitfield High School. It was renamed to Braveview Academy around about the late 1990s. So this is the back of Whitfield, and the scarring blocks were very iconic. That was the majority of what the back of Whitfield was made up of. So I'm going to show you, Whitfield was made up of 3 parts. It was made up of Summerfield Avenue and the front part of Whitfield, which was known as the lower Whitfield. It was the lower part of Whitfield. So I'll show you what the buildings were like there in comparison. Now Summerfield Avenue had scarring blocks, but they looked different to this type of design, but a slightly different design, and so did the lower Whitfield, had some as well. But they were never refaced, and they were all demolished by around the late 1990s. But Summerfield and lower Whitfield had more of a conventional, were made up with more conventional looking buildings, whereas the back was solely made up with the scarring block. So I'll turn the camera around and I'll show you what Summerfield Avenue looks like today, and I'll put pictures on that I'd taken in the early 90s showing the design of scarring block that was in the Summerfield Avenue area, which was the same as what was in the lower Whitfield as well. Now this is the Summerfield area of Whitfield. Now this has gone through a lot of regeneration as well, and it's got a lot of private houses built. And this school here is quite a new one. It's Dundee Primary School, and that was just built a few years back. Whitfield's also got a new community centre, and it's called the Crescent, and that's just further up there. That was built a few years ago as well. But originally Summerfield Avenue had scarring blocks, different to the ones at the back, but was in this sort of general area. And there was playing fields is where the school sits on now. Bowling club's still there, and you could see the scarring blocks there from the back of Whitfield. Dunbar and Harrington just up there in the background. Now this is the sort of typical blocks that were that formed Summerfield. They're more conventional looking. These aren't scarring blocks, these are more terrace type blocks, and these are original to Summerfield. But all these new houses, like the rest of Whitfield, have been put up to as part of the regeneration programme for Whitfield. But this ground was originally occupied by the old scarring blocks, the Summerfield Avenue designed type scarring blocks. And just up there was the old bus terminus for the 15 and 17 routes, as I should know because I drive them. So the buses no longer serve this bit of Summerfield, they terminate up at the new crescent. Now this is the lower part of Whitfield, and that's Whitfield Drive down there. This is actually at the bottom of Whitfield Loan. And the houses are, these are original houses, but at a later stage they had apexes on the fronts put on them. They were slightly refaced, but they were still more conventional looking compared to what the scarring blocks were. Now some of the original lower Whitfield conventional looking blocks have still got their original flat roofs, as you can see over there. But some of them have had apexes put on as well during the regeneration work. So this is a typical sort of design of house that was at the lower part of Whitfield, or the front of Whitfield. But the lower part of Whitfield also had some scarring blocks opposite where the original Whitfield shopping precinct was, which was just up the road a bit. So I'm standing at the former Labour Club. All these shops, that was originally the Whitfield Labour Club, and it was converted into shops a few years back to make use, well, the original shopping centre, which was over there, that was the original Whitfield shopping centre. That was bulldozed back down in 2016, and just further up where the new campus is where Whitfield had two of their multi-storey blocks, Kellyfield and Greenfield, Whitfield and Quarryfield courts, and they were demolished 2003 and 2004. Well, behind me here, that's the lower part of Whitfield again. That's the front of Whitfield, and it's joined to Finch's Terrace. Finch is the neighbouring housing scheme, which is just back up there. And it was roughly about there is where the lower part of Whitfield had its scarring blocks, which were similar to that of the ones at Summerfield. So this is the old grounds that the old original Whitfield shopping precinct was, and there's nothing being done to it at the moment. And the multi-storey blocks were in that area there. This road was extended all the way along to where the new crescent is, and it's now called Lothian Crescent. That road's called Lothian Crescent. It used to originally just stop where the multis were. It was a no-through route. And that's the former Labour Club, Whitfield Labour Club. It's now converted into shops, and there's hot food takeaways as well. And this is like a new community sort of service building, a community hub or a clinic or something, or a medical centre. I'm not quite sure, but it's fairly new anyway. I think it could be I'm sure they had a surgery connected to the shops, and that might be something to do with it, I'm not sure. So you could just make out the original blocks that the lower Whitfield had, and they had these roofs added to them. Now next to it's the new houses, the new private houses. They were built just recently as part of the Whitfield Regeneration programme, and you can see all the new houses that have been built up there as well. So I'm standing down at Drumgeith Park, and that's at the foot of the field behind the road and the adjacent fields. That's been demolished. That was demolished about 10 years ago. So Whitfield was a very large housing scheme that stretched all the way from Baldovie right along to as far as Fintry, and from the front, which is the foot of just at the end here at Drumgeith Park, so it stretches from there right to the back of Whitfield to the countryside. And at the back there's a small island called Tarzan Island. Now it's not surrounded with water, it's just a hill that was named Tarzan Island. I've done a video about this, if you look back on my YouTube channel. It's called Tarzan Island. It's a nice island and it offers lots of nice walks and that. So it's Drumgeith Park stretches quite a bit as well. That goes away up to as far as the old Bickera Road, Bickera Drive rather. Okay. During the late 1970s, when I was very young, I lived in Cheviot Crescent next door to Whitfield, since I was born in 1975 till I was 5-year-old in 1980. Then we moved to the other side of Dundee, where I still live today. I still to this day find the Whitfield scarring blocks a fascinating, interesting design, and when lit up at night, the scarring blocks look what I found to be quite mesmerising. In the next clip, I've tried to resemble something like how I remember Whitfield and the buses that served Whitfield during the night, during the 1970s, when I was just a toddler. During these times, Whitfield had problems with gangs and vandals, which attacked buses and other things. Today, Whitfield is still going through regeneration work, and with the new East Campus School and the new community hub-like building known as the Crescent, modernises Whitfield. Whitfield also has a new primary school opposite the Crescent called Blumby Primary. There are only a few refaced scarring blocks remaining today, and I'm not sure how much longer they're going to last. I hope you've enjoyed my video, and if you wish you could comment, like or subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you for watching.